Good evening, everybody. My name is Alan Blumkin. I'm on the Comfortably Zone Radio Network, and tonight we're having another edition of the Pittsburgh Sports. I'm here with my co-host David Finoli, and our guest tonight is the author Ronald T. Waldo, who's written a number of books on the history of the Pirates, which has been up and down most throughout the last 100 or so years. And tonight we're going to discuss the 1925 World Series. Welcome, gentlemen.
Glad to be here.
Okay, David, would you like to start off on this?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Episode. Last week we talked about the 1909 Pirates. With the season a little bit disappointing this year, we decided to focus the next 5 weeks on the 5 Pirate World Series champions. This week we're going to do the 1925 Pirates. Certainly, in my eyes, when it comes to most Pirate fans and Pirate history, probably one of the most underrated, certainly less talked about Pirate team, but certainly was probably one of the most powerful Pirate teams, certainly offensively. They had just a dynamite offense, scored 912 runs that season, almost 100 more than St. Louis had, who was in second place. And while the pitching stats don't look necessarily impressive in this era, back then offenses were outrageous. In fact, the Pirates, if I'm not mistaken, only had one regular hit under 300, and
the team at 307.
I'm sorry.
The team at 307.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think it was Eddie Moore, if I'm not mistaken, 298, just a titch under. And tonight we have a gentleman who just wrote a fabulous book on the 1925 Pirates, a collection of some of the great books he's written on the team. But before we do that, Ronald, welcome tonight, and I'd like you to talk a little about the newest book you have out.
My newest book that came out back in April, Baseball's Roaring '20s, a decade of legends, characters, and diamond adventures, basically takes a look at some of the stories and tales that helped define that particular decade of baseball. Basically, as you make the segue from the dead ball era to the more explosive offensive game, that Babe Ruth was the catalyst behind the home run ball. And some teams tried to play catch up. In that respect, the Pirates weren't one of them because it just was, I guess, not prudent from how they, I guess, approached it. Even though, as we talk about the 25 Pirates, they did have a guy like Glenn Wright that had power potential, and that season him and Kai Collard both actually set the single-season record by hitting 18 homers apiece. Of course, half of Collar's were inside the park home runs because of his tremendous speed. But, within that book there are, many tales about different things related to the, Pirates' exploits in the 20s. I cover the shenanigans of the banjo-playing, singing trio from 1921 of Rabbit Moranville, Charlie Grimm, Cotton Tierney, Possum Whithead. Year the Pirates looked like they were going to win the pennant, but at the end were taken out by the Giants, and stuff that covered the 25 series, and also some things related to 1926 and 27 when there was some internal strife with the team regarding some players who sort of had a little bit of disagreements with management. But yes, the book kind of covers, and it also kind of brings in little-known players,
right.
Guys you've never heard of, like Heine Mueller, Duster Mills, people like that. Just kind of like a way of showing the stories, just trying to, explain baseball from that era.
It's an outstanding book. I've had the
thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Just an outstanding book. But you had written one on the 25 Pirates, which has been one of, I would say, if I go down to one of the one Pirate team I really have liked over the years, reading about and researching, it's been that team. And a lot of it is just so little is ever written about it until your book had come out. They're usually, when talking about Pirate history, kind of the team you talk about at the end. But it was just a powerful offensive juggernaut. It seemed like it was a two-horse race that year between the Giants and Pirates.
Yes, that's correct.
For the most part. With the Giants, I think it was 8 or 9 games behind at the end of...
4-time defending champions.
Yes.
I think one of the reasons that this Pirate team is obscure is between the Honus Wagner and the Wayner brothers.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
But why don't you talk a little about that incredible offense, Ronald?
Well, it was kind of an interesting mix. The team as a whole possessed that ability to gap hit, and also they had speed. And at the top of the order, you had Eddie Moore, second baseman, Max Carey, the great base stealer from that era, phenomenal stealer, kind of the National League's version of Ty Cobb, not as prolific as a hitter, but as a base stealer, every bit as cagey and good. And then, of course, you had Kyler, who supplied great ability to hit for power. With power in that day, not totally being home runs, it was also doubles and triples, but he possessed unbelievable speed, and he ended up being the man that kind of took the mantle from Carey and then progressed through the rest of the 20s and the early 30s as the premier base stealer in the National League. But then you had Glenn Wright at shortstop, just another guy that was an RBI machine. And, of course, third base, Pie Traynor, probably one of the greatest fielding third basemen in baseball history and a very good clutch hitter, was phenomenal that year. And then the first base situation was a little rough early on. They had made a trade in the off season after the 24 season, getting rid of Moranville, who kind of was a thorn in the side of management for years. His carefree style kind of wore on owner Barney Dreyfuss after a while. Him, Charlie Grimm, and star pitcher Wilbur Cooper were shipped to the Cubs for pitcher Vic Aldridge, outfielder George Grantham, and a first baseman by the name of Al Nihas, who was a minor leaguer at the time. And that was the man that was given the job at the beginning of the year, even though Grantham actually converted over to first base because Nihas had a hamstring injury when the season started. But Nihas didn't last long. He was shipped on out in a trade with the Reds at the end of May, so it ended up being Grantham, and then they brought in veteran Stuffy McInnes, who had great days with the Philadelphia Athletics back in the dead ball era, to give like a lefty.
Nice year for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, yes, he did. A nice lefty-righty platoon at first base because Grantham was a left-handed batter, Stuffy was a right-handed batter. And then the catcher, you had the split between switch-hitting Johnny Gooch and the interesting Earl Smith, who, when he was with the Giants at the beginning of that decade, was a constant source of aggravation for manager John McGraw, either with his nighttime activities, stuff he did on the field, and then McGraw sent him to the Braves, and the Pirates picked him up from the Braves, I believe in 2024. But one of the, as far as a catcher, great at throwing the other team off their game while he's behind the plate. He always worked the other players with the verbal line of insults, chatter. Was a notorious bat tipper, which I believe in one of the World Series games he did get called for interference from tipping someone's bat. So it was an interesting mix, but yes, a lineup that hit, solid hitting lineup. As you stated, the only guy that was below 300 that was a main starter was Eddie Moore at 298 with, Kyler 357. You had Max Carey hit 343 that year. Just a phenomenal lineup.
That is, and Kyler, I believe he cleared 1,000 on the OPS, which again in the time period.
And also that year he set the single season record for total bases, and that still is the Pirate record that stands today, which is amazing considering you had home run hitters like Ralph Kiner and Willie Stargell followed decades later. So just absolutely amazing that record still stands today from a team from the 20s.
Absolutely.
Well, Cooper's winning number of wins is still their all-time high for pitching wins.
Yes, and he was kind of upset when he was thrown in that deal because he thought the perception was that he was a troublemaker too, since Moranville was, obviously kind of a problem, and Grimm wasn't as much as a troublemaker, but he kind of liked to have a good time. And Cooper was a actually stringent person who, when he pitched for the Pirates, a lot of people perceived that he was always angry, but he was a tough competitor, and he didn't like when teammates made mistakes, so it came across as he was aloof and such. Right. But yeah, he wasn't very happy being included in that deal.
Now, Al, you mentioned they were the Giants were the defending champions.
4-time defending champions, yeah.
Exactly. Why don't you talk a little about those teams that the Pirates were going up against in 25?
Well, basically, a lot of those guys were put in the Hall of Fame by Frankie Frisch. George Kelly at first base. You had Frisch at second. You had Travis Jackson at short, Freddie Lindstrom at third. I think George Burns was one of the outfielders. They had Irish Musial, and they had Ross Youngs, who the following year, 1926, would pass away at the age of 30 from Bright's disease.
Wow.
Which is a kidney problem. And McGraw loved him. And pitching, they essentially had Dolph Luke and Art Neff. I mean, none of these guys, the pitchers they had during those years were actual Hall of Famers, but they were pretty good for that period. That period was at the time. They had beaten the Yankees in the 1921-1922 World Series. The Yankees beat them in 23, and then the Senators beat them in 1924. So, and also Bill Terry was starting to emerge, and Mel Ott was on the team, but Mel Ott didn't play very much because he was perceived as too young at the time.
Right.
And the catcher was Hank Gowdy, who became famous in the 1924 World Series for stepping on his mask and giving, I think it was Muddy Rule, a reprieve at bat, and Muddy Rule had a double, which was a key in the inning when they won the game. Washington won the game 7.
Oh, man. So, now, Ronald, the pitching staff that year was, I mean, a lot of these guys forgotten in Pirate history, but certainly some good pitchers with Lee Meadows, Ray Creamer. You mentioned Vic Aldridge, who had a nice season for him.
Right.
I mean, probably the most popular of the group was 43-year-old Babe Adams, who was
correct.
Pretty much in the bullpen by that point in time. Let's talk a little about that staff.
That staff, it was your standard 1920s staff. High, most of them had high ERAs, but that's because the offense was so good in that decade. But good mix of people. You had Meadows, won 19 games that year. Creamer came in with 17. Aldridge, who was a holdout during spring training, actually did not participate in any spring training action. Got a little bit of a late start, but became a solid second half pitcher for manager Bill McKechnie, won 15. And then there was Johnny Morrison, the swingman, who would start games, and he was McKechnie's reliable reliever. He also won 17. And the crafty lefty that the year before actually led the National League in winning percentage, Amo Edie, also won 17 games as well. So, standard staff at that time. You kind of had 5 guys you relied on. Adams was thrown in and mixed a little bit, mainly on the pen, occasional start here or there. And as the season progressed, as I mentioned before, Niehaus, the first baseman, when he was traded to Cincy, they picked up veteran pitcher Tom Sheehan, who actually pitched out of the pen the whole year. And then in August, Red Oldham was picked up, I believe from Des Moines. He was pitching for Des Moines in the minor leagues, and Oldham had kind of been blackballed years earlier after having a run in with Ty Cobb and Judge Landis, because I believe he played off season in some games out in the West Coast with people that I guess weren't sanctioned, to play with. So he got in trouble for that.
Okay, 2 things. This is the Tom Sheehan who went 1-17 for the 1916 A's.
Yes, that would be the
same one.
Yeah.
Okay, and I never knew how to pronounce Emil's last name until you just said it. YDE. I never knew how to pronounce that.
Oh,
thank you.
Yeah, Emil. Yeah, Emil. That's one of the ones that I didn't pronounce correctly for many years.
Now, the team struggled early on. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, by the end of May, they were still hovering around 500, and it was like a back-and-forth race until early August when they started taking a little control. What were some of the problems early on in the race?
Part of it was settling on the lineup. Now, the interesting thing was the year before, Collar, it took him about a month and a half to break into the starting lineup in 24, and when he did, he went on a tear. But at the end of the season, because in 24 they battled with the Giants and Giants took control at the end of the year and beat them out, as did the Brooklyn Robins too. But there were some grumblings in people in the front office, never attributed it directly to Dreyfuss, that Collar was overrated. But the truth of the matter was he played a lot of the last few weeks of that 24 season with an injured shoulder. And the intention in spring training of 25 was that Grantham was going to get work in the outfield with Carey and Clyde Barnhart, who was left fielder I had failed to mention earlier, and it might be a platoon with Collar, which Collar didn't like. But Collar seized control of the job, and obviously I think appeared in every game that year. I mean, also started every game. Like I said, Grantham, who was more of a second baseman, third baseman by trade, nickname of Boots because he was prone to fielding miscues, but developed in a decent first baseman that year. It just was a team, I think, that it took a little while to gel. I mean, you figured it the year before you had the five rookies, which would have been Collar, Moore, Edie, Creamer, and I'm forgetting the fifth one for some reason. But they had a slew of rookies that played the year before, and so these guys were kind of new to the league, so they were still, I guess, getting their feet under them, trying to figure things out. There seemed to be, like, in my opinion, like 2 games in, like, the middle of June where they totally demolished the Brooklyn Robins 21-5. I believe it was like June 20th. Max Carey hit for the cycle. It was a Saturday game. They didn't play Sunday, and they made a trip to St. Louis. And then on the Monday game on the 22nd, they torched the Cardinals 24-6. So at that point, that got their record to be in about 10, 11 games above 500. But they showed the capability at times to hit. It just finally, as you said, caught fire as the season progressed, and they really, did really catch fire as you get into, July, August, September.
Oh yeah, those were 2 incredible 45 runs over 2 games. I mean, just mind.
I'm not sure. Is that a record? I mean, it quite.
No, the Red Sox in 1950 had 2 straight games against the St. Louis Browns when they scored 49 runs. One of the games was 29-4.
Oh, okay. So
which was the 20th century record until the Texas got 30 in the game against Baltimore 10 years ago.
10 years ago, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the end of September, they kind of gained control. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was one of the games against Philadelphia. Late they clinched it. I know they had beaten them 14-4, and then that pretty much ended the pennant race. And they went into the World Series against the defending world champions from Washington. Al, do you recall those teams from back then, the Washington teams?
I know they had, among others, they had Sam Rice, and they had Goose Goslin. In fact, Goslin played in all 5 World Series from 1921 through 1939 that didn't involve the Yankees or the Philadelphia A's. He was on 3 Washington teams, and he was on the Detroit teams that won the American League pennant in 1934 and 1935. And Joe Judge was the first baseman. And I think Bucky Harris was still playing. He was the player manager at that point. And Roger Peckinpah was the shortstop, and he made a slew of errors in the World Series. He was the MVP in the American League that year. Well, that was the year of Ruth's big bellyache, and the way they were awarding MVPs in the American League back then is once you won it, you couldn't win it again, which was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever come across. But that was the year the Yankees finished 7th, which was their last second division finish until 1965. And third baseman, I believe, was Ozzie Bluge. And the pitchers, they had Walter Johnson, and one of the pitchers they had on the team, who was a regular starter, was Stan Coveleski, who was one of the big World Series heroes for the Cleveland Indians in 1920 when he won 3 games. And they had Furpo Marbury as it was still relieving, and they had they were defending champions, and they had a pretty good established ball club.
Yeah, Stan Coveleski from Shamokin, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
But I mean, certainly a solid team going there. Peckinpah ended up becoming the Bill Abstein of the the 25 series.
Yeah.
But going in here, they had to be considered pretty strong favorites, Ronald. Would that be your assessment of it?
When doing the research for the book, I saw pretty much that you kind of got the feeling that, they, being the defending champs and the experience factor, that in that respect they were considered the favorites. But, of course, a lot of people had fallen in love with the Pirates' hitting ability, so they were kind of interested to see, how that would go. And in the first few games, it didn't go so well as far as them being explosive at the plate.
I mean, Walter Johnson just in 1 and 4 absolutely controlled the game.
Exactly. That's, understandable. He's the greatest pitcher of that era.
Absolutely. Now, they come into Game 5 at Griffith Stadium down 3-1, and if I'm not mistaken, at the time, no team had ever rebounded from that.
No, nobody. No.
No, that's correct. Yes.
Now they pop out early in the first inning with a lead, and why don't you take us from there? How while it wasn't as bad as what necessarily the '79 Pirates, it was kind of similar at.
They were the only team to come back from 3-1 from the first World Series. I'm not counting the series. The 5, we had to win 5 out of 9 until 1958 when the Yankees did that to the Braves. They were the only Pirates, the only one in a 55-year period, basically, to pull that off.
Absolutely.
Okay, Ronald can probably discuss the individual games a lot better than I can.
Well, I mean, you're down 1-0. Why don't you take us through that a little bit in Game 5 with the Pirates coming back to stay alive?
Yeah, they fall behind early, but it's Vic Aldridge on the mound. He actually had secured the victory in Game 2, which was won at Forbes Field on a Collar bounce home run. And let's give cheers to the temporary bleachers in that World Series, because that was what accounted for many home runs at Forbes Field. Now, of course, the temporary bleachers at Washington accounted for the controversial play in Game 3 where Sam Rice, dove in, and the question was, did he actually catch the ball or was it handed to him? But as far as, Game 5, Pirates are, done, and then finally things get rolling in the third inning with actually wildness on the part of the starting pitcher for Washington, who was, before mentioned, Stan Coveleski. He, after I think Eddie Moore was retired, he walks Max Carey, he walks Collar, and then Barnhart singles, and that knocks in Carey, moves Collar to third, and amazingly Barnhart, who would probably be considered one of the players on the team most bereft of speed, actually stole second. Collar scored on a trainer sac fly, and the inning ended when Glenn Wright was retired, but the Pirates went ahead 2-1. Senators did come back to tie it in the fourth 2-2, but things finally got rolling in the seventh when the Pirates put another 2 spot on the board to go up 4-2. And they never really looked back. Coveleski got replaced in that inning by Win Ballou. Actually, the inning came to an end when Collar was caught actually trying to steal a home plate. So, but the Sens made it tight in the seventh, putting another run up. And then we scored a run off Tom Zachary in the eighth and added another run in the ninth. And that was pretty much all she wrote. So Buccos won that one 6-3, knocked out 13 hits, and the key was Carey, Collar, Barnhart, Wright, and Earl Smith all had 2 hits apiece. So they did it basically with a lot of singles, because I think the only extra base hit, Glenn Wright had a double in the game. So it was, they had it on singles and some base on balls. Kovaleski actually walked 4 in his 6+ innings of work. So that helped turn things around for him, because up to that point, the mystery was, where were the Pirate bats? But as you said, when you're facing Walter Johnson in games 1 and 4, it may not necessarily be all about the Pirates' lack of hitting. It might just be because of his phenomenal pitching.
Now, the next game, one of the great games in franchise history, Kramer's on the mound and gives up a homer to Goslin in the first. Peckinpah doubles in the second to put the Senators up 2-0 at Forbes Field on a day that was exactly 35 years before Mazeroski would certainly have his day in the sun in 1960. So you're down again. You're down 2-0. Take us through that just thrilling contest in Game 6.
Well, Game 6, yes, they fall behind, as you said, 2-0 in the third inning. They get it all back. Again, it's this time on the mound. Kramer's starting for the Pirates. It's Alex Ferguson for the Senators, who actually was a Yankee at one time, I believe. Starts with a walk, and then Kerry made it, he was safe on a fielder's choice, so you have guys on first and second, nobody out. Collar bunts him over, and it's weird because it's basically you're doing it like with station-to-station plays with more small ball, because the first run scores on a ground out by Clyde Barnhart, and then the second run scores on a single by Pie Traynor. So that's puts the score at 2-2. And then we're going to take to the heroics of the fifth inning, and I have to add some background material to this one because it involves Eddie Moore, the second baseman. In Game 5, on a ground ball or a line drive up the middle that Moore made an effort to dive to catch, he actually severely injured his right hand, and he was in a lot of pain the rest of that game. So during infield practice prior to Game 6, the first ball hit to him, smacks him in the hand, and it's so painful that he collapsed to the ground. And now, obviously, being the gamer that he was, he didn't want to let Bill McKechnie know how serious it was. So he basically leaves the field and actually went under the grandstand and cried for about 10 minutes. And Honus Wagner was there because Honus was doing a syndicated column for the newspapers, which basically means it was a ghostwriter, but he would kind of give insight. And he actually put his arm around his shoulder and consoled the youngster. Now, Eddie Moore was an interesting player, kind of cocky young kid who didn't always take stuff seriously, which is why during the regular season he got benched in favor of veteran Johnny Rawlings. But when Rawlings broke his leg and basically shelved him for the rest of the year, McKechnie had no choice but to put Moore back in the lineup. So in the fifth inning, Eddie Moore leads off. He can't really grip the bat as he should, but yet launches an Alex Ferguson offering and smacks it into the temporary left field bleachers for the home run that ends up being the deciding marker, because that was the last run of the game, and the Pirates ended up prevailing 3-2. And when they all looked down, because they were down 3-1, they tied the series 3-3, which set it up for a decisive Game 7.
Now this game, if you take away Mazeroski's home run, to me, if they win by any other way than Mazeroski's home run, this is the premier game in Pirate history.
I do agree with that.
Game 7. It was just from everything I've read in my research, just a deluge that day. Game certainly didn't sound like it was fit for baseball to be played. And the Senators score once again in the first inning, this time they score big, 4 runs in the first, and eventually by the fourth they're up 6-3. So take us through this
early in the game, field conditions are horrible. Vic Aldridge having trouble, so he gets knocked out of the box. And as you said, looks good for Walter, but he's having trouble too. There's 2 theories behind that. One theory that I adhered to initially was when he pitched in Game 4, trying to stretch a single and a double in the third inning, he injured his leg. So he was probably not 100%. Another theory is that after he won that game and the Senators were up 3-1, Pirate coach Jack Onslow happened to meet Bobby Veach, who was career was coming to an end. Great player in the outfield for the Tigers for years with Ty Cobb. He was there basically as a role player pinch hitter. They shared a cab, and I guess Onslow asked Veach, well, when you played for Detroit, you guys always seemed to hit Johnson pretty good. What was your secret? And Veach figured it's 3-1. This series is over. I can share information here, which is interesting, but he basically said it was a quirk in Walter's delivery when he was going to throw a curve. And Onslow passed the information along to Max Carey, who was the team captain, and Carey supposedly told the team. Now, whether that accounts for what happened in Game 7, it's kind of a neat folklore aspect of things. But the injury probably had a hand. Obviously, the rain did because it bothered Johnson the whole game, too, where basically he was always asking for sawdust on the mound.
Did they ever consider postponing that game?
Amazingly, as the game was going on, Judge Landis was sitting with Clark Griffith, the owner of the Senators, and Landis actually, as the game was going on, it said, I think we should stop this. And Griffith said, you can't. It's a Game 7 World Series game. Once you start the game, you have to complete it no matter what. So,
and they were up at that point. Washington was up at that point.
Yes. So it would have went to, So at least give Griffith credit for know, the integrity of baseball being more important than his team having the advantage.
I was listening to the 1960 highlight album that was put out then, and an old Pittsburgh press editor, I forget the name, was on it, and he actually said if they didn't play that game that day, apparently it was just a bad stretch of rain that was going to hit Pittsburgh over the next 2 weeks. He said they would have been able to complete it or to do the game over the next 2 weeks.
Was that Chet Smith? Chet Smith?
I think it might have been Chet Smith. I'll check what I get.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know how accurate that is, but I mean that adds a little.
You have to look up the weather reports.
Right.
It seems feasible because remember, a game was postponed in Washington, and Game 7 was supposed to be October 14th, and they couldn't play it because of the rain. And had that game been played, McKechnie announced that Red Oldham was going to start because Aldridge would have been starting on limited rest. He still started on limited rest the day they played it. But, it was like it had gone too long, and it was like they decided they had to try to get it done. But, the Pirates in the 7th actually tied the game up. They're down 6-4, and lo and behold, the inning starts because Eddie Moore reaches on an error by Roger Peckinpah, who made 8 errors in the series, was considered to go to the series. But the problem was that the concern for the Pirates' speed. He was just the whole team had a concern for making plays quick because they knew that the Pirates on grounders to the infield could beat him up. And it actually, I guess, worked against him because he was trying to be too quick, too fine. But Moore, he reaches on an error. Carey doubles him home. Kyler moves Carey over to third. Right. And then after Barnhart is retired, Pie Traynor blasts a triple opposite field, knocking in Carey, and Traynor tries to stretch it inside the Parker to put the Pirates in the lead, but he's gone down at the plate for the last stop. Peckinpah at least looks like the hero of the next inning because with 1 out, he smacks a home run. So heading into the bottom of the 8th, the Pirates are down 7-6.
Right. Now, of course, a lot of controversy comes with the bottom of the 8th, one of the great innings in Pirate history. Why don't you talk a little about that inning and some of the controversy with Kyler's game series winning hit?
Of course, that inning, Wright and Stuffy McInnes, who was installed as a starter, Grantham was benched after Game 4 on the recommendation of Giants manager John McGraw. He just thought McInnes would steady the team down because veteran, and it seemed to work. But they were Wright and McInnes were retired to start the inning. Earl Smith hits a 2-out double, and Emil Edey comes in to run for him. And the weird thing about that is that McKechnie's basically showing what he thinks of certain pitchers, because if he's running, this is your last game, then he's not available to pitch because he was the man that got knocked out of the box in Game 4 when Johnson pitched. And prior to that game, he got rattled by the photographers taking photos of him as he was warming up, and it kind of got him off his game. Plus, the story goes that he actually warmed up a little too vociferously in pre-amble leading up to the game and had nothing left when the game started. But he pinch runs for Smith. Carson Bigby, the veteran, limited duty that year, basically pinch hitter and occasional outfield duty, bats for Creamer and actually smacks a double and ties the game as Edie scores. And, of course, the rain's still coming down. Johnson, 2 times during that inning, asked for sawdust.
Right.
So with Bigby on second, Johnson has trouble and walks Eddie Moore. And then lo and behold, Max Carey hits a ground ball to Roger Peckinpah, and in his effort to beat the Speedy Moore to second, he kind of stumbles and doesn't get there. So Moore safe at second, and Carey is on at first, which brings up Collar with 2 guys on. Johnson works the count to 2-2. Collar starts fouling off pitch after pitch for foul balls. And then Johnson throws a pitch that him and catcher Muddy Rule believe strike 3. But the umpire behind the plate, Barry McCormick, calls it a ball. So, it was the point where actually one or both of them had started making the, walk, like, okay, innings over, we're headed to the dugout.
Yeah.
But it was called ball 3, and Collar didn't take any chances on the next pitch. He smacked it down the right field line. Fair, even though I think Goose Goslin wasn't sure. He thought it...
Claiming, he was claimed it was foul.
Foul, and he actually claimed that he could show the little mark in the mud where it was, but the umpire called it fair, and it skittered, I guess, under the tarpaulin. It was on the side. Now, everybody rounded the bases and scored, including Collar, so the Pirates thought they had an 11-7 lead. Umpires conferred and said that ground rules because the ball got lodged under the tarpaulin. 2 guys had to go back, which were Carey and Collar, and just 2 runs were permitted to score, but it gave the Pirates a 9-7 lead. And then, of course, in the 10th inning, veteran Red Oldham, his only appearance of this World Series. But at this point, it's misty out. It is dark. It is gloomy. It is dreary. You can't see anything. He comes in. He's a southpaw pitcher. Strikes out Sam Rice, lefty batter. Induces Bucky Harris to hit a liner to Eddie Moore for the second out, and then strikes out Goslin looking for the third out, and then the Pirates ordained as world champions.
Yeah, I read that Ben Johnson was just more than a little irritated about the way that series turned out.
He was very upset. Actually,
I know that.
Harris.
Yeah, I was just trying to.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh man. Now, Bill McKechnie. If I'm not mistaken, was that the series he wore the same clothes?
Yes, his undershirt, his underwear, and his socks from Game 5 on because he didn't want to break the good luck. So when Game 7 was over, he goes, the first thing I want to do is peel the stuff off and go, hit the shower.
And he would win a World Series 15 years later with the Cincinnati Reds.
Absolutely. But, it was just an incredible series and an incredible book. I've enjoyed that. Certainly your newest, the 1902 book, is one of my favorites. And
that's actually of the ones I've written. Yeah, that's a favorite too, because a lot of politics about what was going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely, and certainly. For a future episode, that would certainly be one I'd enjoy. I'm sure you love that era, Al.
Oh yeah.
And that's one Bill Rainier, who I've co-wrote several Pirate books with. We always have the discussion back and forth. I always believe that 1902 team was the superior Pirate team of all time, and he always. He always disputes that, and
who's he
goes with 09.
It's close. Obviously you didn't have the World Series then. Had there not been the raids, Dreyfuss was going to consider it that year. And I'm always I always feel that they came that close to not losing Jack Cheesebro. If you had had Cheesebro in 03, things could have been different with the first modern World Series with the Boston team.
Yeah, and they missed by one game in 1908 because they wound up finishing a second place tie with the Giants, one game behind the Cubs. They would have beaten the Cubs the last day of the season. They probably would have won that pennant.
Oh man! Well, we certainly thank you very much, Ronald.
Yes, it was a pleasure, Ronald.
I enjoyed being here. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's always great to talk about baseball history.
Oh, yeah.
At least that's a fun part of it. And next week we're going to talk 1960. And Al was was right there. At Pitt at the time.
As a freshman at Pitt, that's fall.
Offering some great perspective on the series in 1960.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. And again, this is Alan Blumkin on the Comfortably Zone Radio Network, and we will return at some point next week. Thank you both.
All right. Thank you much.
Bye-bye.
All right. All right, guys. Have a good night. Thank you very much.
You too.